What's up, family? Welcome back to the Stop Sinking Show, where we go from struggle to flow. This is going to be an extremely personal episode. Some of my thoughts while processing the passing of my father. I have a feeling something relatable and universal will still come out because the more I live, the more I've realized we are all living the same life. But I guess I'm still giving myself the out because I take clips of these episodes and put videos of them on Instagram, Shorts, and YouTube, and I'm not sure if this particular episode will result in any share-worthy clip, but I worry about that every time, I guess. Let's get on with it. I have so many thoughts, and by no means do I expect this to be an exhaustive episode. A lot of who I am and what I talk about here has been birthed by the seed of my father, quite literally, and very much in every metaphoric sense. If you heard my father's eulogy on the last episode, which I'm sorry for the poor audio quality, by the way, I considered re-recording it. I just didn't have the emotional energy to do that. If you did hear it, you would have gotten a glimpse into his life and what about him that I admire and struggle to be like. This particular episode, I wanted to talk about the idea I have come to of what happens when someone passes. And my idea has given me a lot of peace. To cut to the chase, I think what happens is that we merge back with God. I'll start from how I got here. The last half a year, almost an entire year, I have done everything to feel like I have undone any blessing I may have earned in being there for my father through his sickness in India. Now, when I said this to my friend, he said, life doesn't work like debits and credits, and nothing can change the fact that I actually was physically present for the 3 years in India to help him. But since he got better, I started to take his life for granted and started behaving like I have him forever again, which meant I thought it was worth the time I had with him to ruin it with arguments and fights and grudges and misunderstandings. I thought I had forever. So why accept the ways he was doing me wrong? Maybe it was more acceptable if it was just for a little bit. And now that he's passed, I realize that I cannot settle any differences with a dead man, which really makes me question the value of differences while we are alive. And it's something here that I'm going to have to ponder on more, but that's not the point of today. The point of today and why I mention this is for a reason. I was sitting with his picture, still thinking of him through the scope of my recent memory. And we have these large frames of him made up. So when I say his picture, I'm sitting in the living room with his frames. It's really interesting to watch your human tendency taking the last trailing 3 months or 6 months and use that as the measure of your entire picture of something. We are so much ruled by our random access memory, what is readily available, what is most recent and available. We are biased to it. We forget to take a look at things through an entire scope. This skewed bias is how we end up doing disservice to our future selves because we are so hyper-focused on a moment, on the moment. And present focus is important for meditation and peace, but it's not exactly how you can design your life. If you just optimize for the present moment and not care about the tomorrow you, not have any intentionality about it, then when the tomorrow you comes, you will feel betrayed by the past versions of you that did not look out for you now. Everything matters. So while I was sitting there trying to settle differences through the confines of his human form, even still, some of the problems he created are still alive. They are present in the resolutions that the rest of my family and I need to work through. But again, what I am most disturbed by is that I did not use the time well. And so I will have a lot of things that I have to work through for the rest of my life, maybe, that I need to get to peace about. But again, what disturbs me is just trying to settle it with the last 6 months version of my father, who I just want to say one more thing to, who I just want to make one more point to, who I just wish I could have said something to make him see the truth. And then I had this very profound realization that was passed on to me by my brother-in-law. While I have all these grudges and issues and things I want to resolve with a dead person who I can never now resolve all these issues with, my brother-in-law said this to me. He says, Dad sees everything now. And I know this is something that we all say, and I never really felt it before. And now I understand what he means. And it gave me so much peace because I realized it isn't just the last 6 months confined human form of him that I now have a relationship with. My relationship with him now transcends what he did or didn't see, what I did or did not fail to show him. He now sees it all. Here's what happens, I think, through birth and death. I think we are all conceptions of the source. When we are born, it is almost as if a piece of the source breaks off. It is the core of who we are that gets implanted into us, this piece of the source. It's obviously shrouded by human form uniqueness and categories and definitive adjectives. But what we come from, what is inside of us, what is the essence of us is indescribable. It is everything and no thing. What is it not? It's ineffable. I also had the same profound realization when having to feel the detachment from my father's human form in real time. When I was at the hospital with his body, I was there for an hour or so. And as someone who is always in a rush and always looking to move on to the next thing, I didn't know how to spend time there without feeling inside, even in 5-10 minutes, that it was time to go. But I allowed myself the time to sit there. I knew I would never get it again. It's not like I can put a pin in this and experience this sitting next to my father's still warm, dead body again. It was an experience, one that has a lot of takeaways for future conversations. But what I'm trying to point out is, after an hour, I still could not get enough of him. I kissed him like 100 times. I touched his feet, massaged his legs, played with his hair, his beard. I still could not get enough. I did not want to stop. How could I? When I'm having to accept that it would be the last time I ever get to. Meanwhile, the police officer was sitting outside the hospital room for over an hour with me, and he told me he wasn't there for me, just so I don't feel rushed like I'm bothering him. And I processed so many emotions in this time. I will have to talk about this again as its own thing, but while I was having this moment, my mother was sitting alone at home with the police that I just left her with. also processing the fact her husband had just passed. And I was torn. I needed to go back home to be with her, but I didn't want to leave my father. And eventually, a hospital nurse came and told me I really needed to go. And I never allowed myself to experience in the past couple of years the feeling of abandoning my father somewhere. Through all the many health issues, I never felt like I'm getting in the car just to not come back to him again. It was such a bad feeling. But then I had this beautiful realization that brings us back to our point. As I was walking out of the hospital room, I turned around to get one last look, and I realized just because I walk out of this room does not mean I don't take my father with me. He is more than his body. He is more than this just human form. He is more than just this form that I know of him. It's a kiss. And not in some fantastical, magical way. I mean it in a very literal way, which is the core of everything I talk about in this entire show. We are just two things that someone has said to us that they might remember, that we might remember, that guide us in our life. We are alive only in the voices of ours that people keep in their heads, that may or may not be of use to them, that may provide direction or caution. In this manner, I carry my father everywhere. I always have. Most of my life with him has been remote. Just me carrying him in my head. And if his principles are as sound as I believe they are, and as I have seen them to be in the creation of a beautiful, successful life, then if I have anything to do with it, I will live them out loud, so to become an example for others to adopt the same principles and further elongate my father's life. This is how someone lives forever. It isn't them or the remembrance of them that even matters at that point. Definitely not a connection with the physical form. It's more so the adopted lessons that are incorporated into ubiquity. You do not think about where the fundamental truths come from. It matters not who they are credited to either. As long as the principles live on, the spirit does too. And so as I connected to the transcendence of my father, past his human form, merged back into this ever-present, all-seeing energy, again, what gives me the most peace about this, that my father can see it all if he is at all interested. And I realize that it's possible that the storyline only continues in my own head, and that these small human affairs may no longer be of concern to he or who has transcended it. And I hope it isn't, obviously. I hope he is so free from all of this nonsense. But nonetheless, in my story, I am peaceful, or more peaceful than I was before I realized this, in every moment of my life, not just the ones that I got to show and didn't show. My father, who is indistinguishable now from the source, from God, can now see it all. And because I know, in my quiet moments, when no one was watching, I have plenty to be proud of, even though I have 1,000 things I'm ashamed of. I am at peace knowing if anyone was to scrub through my entire life, the story of how I've lived all of it, they would find more moments to be proud of than to judge harshly. And maybe, even if I was not giving myself that credit, maybe it's 50-50 like everyone else is in life. But I am so proud of the good half, enough for the other half to not even matter as much to me. Either way, what I think happens is your loved ones become the now distinguishable, assignable face to what was once just an imagined entity. God, your conscience, angels watching over you, all these things, when you think about them, have usually an imagined face borrowed from a movie or a statue. When you think of God, depending on what culture you're from, so many of us imagine a man in the clouds, an image that has been depicted so many times around us that it's even impacted and imprinted our imagination. And now, when your loved one passes, like my father has, what happens is they now step into this divine role as the very real face that you have known and seen your entire life. God is no longer an imagination. My conscience is much harder now to ignore when it is the direct face of my father. When looking at his picture in a frame, I considered making one of his pictures my wallpaper. And I had instant anxiety at the thought of making him my wallpaper. I had the thought, I'm so ashamed of what you might see, Dad. I'm so ashamed if you have you as my picture and you can see me all the time. I'd be so ashamed. And that's what led to the rest of this realization. Because I realized the picture is just a representation. He is all around me now anyway. Everywhere he never was, he now is. And although the picture, a wallpaper on my phone, might make my shame of what he might see very real for me, although I'm ashamed of so many things, I'm also so proud of what he might see. If I'm ashamed of 20% of all of me, I'm proud of 80% of what he might see. And it didn't have to be this case. I could have easily lived my life in a way where I would be ashamed of 80% of what he might see now and only proud of 20%. Which is the note I will leave you on to think about. If you knew the face you have known your whole life, the one you love, the one you sought approval from as a child, maybe even as an adult, the one you admired your whole life, your hero, even the one you fought the most and needed to prove the most to. If you knew at one point in your life, they will all merge with God. They will see all that they may or may not see today. All that you try to prove and don't prove and defend. All that you may yearn or feel desperate for them to recognize. If you knew at one point they would get to watch the entire movie of your life, how differently would you live today? How much more would you value each decision? How much more would you recognize the magnitude of each and every action, gesture, deed, or misdeed? If you live every day like it's preparation, if you recognize the weight of every word in the dialogue and every step in the exerted effort, it becomes impossible to fail. And becomes possible to feel peace. I love you, family. Stay true always. I'll see you on the next show.